that the imposition of additional tariffs, both universal and sectoral ones, is unjustified and arbitrary. These tariffs are damaging for prosperity. They negatively impact economic growth, foremost in the US, but also globally, as confirmed by IMF and WTO in their latest forecasts. Tariffs are taxes paid by businesses and ultimately by consumers. They will raise the cost of imports, disrupt supply chains, and force companies to either absorb the cost or pass them on through higher prices, building up the inflation. We welcome the 90-day suspension of a portion of the recent imposed US universal tariffs. At the same time, we are deeply concerned by many tariffs increases remaining in place and possible new tariffs. More importantly, we are very concerned by the uncertainty that the US administration announcements brought to the global economy. We understand the US seeks to strengthen the resilience of its domestic industrial base and to enhance its economic security. But we believe that the announced tariffs are not the right way to achieve these goals. On behalf of the Council, I can assure you that we are united in our readiness to engage in a constructive dialogue with the US. Our priority is clearly to agree on the solution that is balanced and mutually beneficial and that brings about more predictable trade and investment conditions. We believe that there is sufficient scope for delivering such a solution, but it is clear that significant joint efforts will still be needed to get there. We welcome recent concrete steps made by the Commission in the form of offer of negotiations in selected areas. The step has full backing from the Council. As a clear sign of our good faith and our restraint, we have temporarily suspended the first set of countermeasures. It is also a sign of us not wishing to add to the already unprecedented levels of economic uncertainty. But let me be clear. We will defend our legitimate interests and rights if we have to. And we will do so in a united, targeted and measured manner. There is a broad agreement in the Council on the need to work on possible further countermeasures which would complement those already adopted. Our countermeasure can be fully reversed at any time if a negotiated solution is found. If, however, negotiation failed to deliver the desired outcome, we will consider taking further steps, keeping all options on the table, including WTO complaint. We are closely working with the Commission. We are carefully assessing not only the effects of new US tariffs on EU export, but also monitoring any unwanted and indirect effects. We simply cannot absorb global overcapacity, not accept dumping on our markets. President, honourable members, Commissioner, in these challenging times, we remain committed to the rules-based international order as we continue to believe in an open and predictable global trading system and benefits all partners. We are engaging with our international partners both through multilateral fora as well as bilaterally. That is why the issue of possible trade diversion is firmly on our radar screen. In the Council, there is a broad agreement on the importance of deepening our existing partnership around the world, as well as sealing new win-win deals. Finally, I want to underline that in times of growing uncertainty, single market stands as a vital source of stability and resilience. The new situation we are facing gives an additional sense of urgency of implementing the new European competitiveness deal. We will therefore be stepping up our work in the Council towards lifting the remaining barriers to the proper functioning of our single market and boosting its potential. Thank you.
Ďakujem, pán minister. A teraz poprosím.
Thank you, Minister. And now, Commissioner Šefčovič on behalf of the Commission.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne, pán viceprezident.
Thank you very much, Vice President.
Members, dear Minister, dear Andrzej, first and foremost, I'd like to appreciate that we have this very timely debate this morning, because it would allow us to have a deeper look at our current state of our relationship between European Union and United States of America in the field of bilateral trade and economic cooperation. As it was already highlighted by the Minister, we have built, together with the United States, over the years, the largest bilateral and investment relationship in the world. Today, the European Union is by far the most important economic partner of the United States. Our trade in goods and services has doubled over the last decade, surpassing 1.7 trillion euros in 2023, with 851 billion euros of trade in goods and 746 billion euros of trade in services. And for us, likewise, the US is our biggest trading partner. Our business communities have invested strongly on both sides. Total bilateral investment stocks reached 5.3 trillion euros in 2022. Direct EU investment in the US is worth of 2.7 trillion euros, making the EU companies the largest foreign investor in the United States of America. On top of it, and I think it's very important to underline, that European companies, EU firms, directly employ 3.4 million people in the US, with millions more American workers, farmers and ranchers benefiting indirectly. Trade and investment between the European Union and the United States are therefore key building blocks of our shared prosperity, technology and research prowess, as well as remaining fundamental to our economic security. So it is evident that we have a mutual interest in nurturing and further developing our economic links and in making our partnership and relationship stronger. But as you know very well, honourable members, our trade relations are currently facing strong headwinds. The US has unilaterally increased its import duties on EU goods in a significant manner. These import taxes are unjustified and cause economic harm on both sides of the Atlantic. They disrupt supply chains and affect global markets. They hurt EU and US companies, workers and farmers. They create uncertainty for transatlantic investment. They raise prices for consumers and businesses and increase the inflation in the US. The US has temporarily decreased its universal additional tariffs from 20 to 10%. In response, we have shown significant goodwill by pausing our rebalancing measures on the steel and aluminium tariffs for 90 days. With this pause, we want to give space for negotiations. However, US tariffs still cover 380 billion euros worth of EU exports to US, corresponding to 70% of our total exports at rates between 10 to 25%. In addition, more US tariff actions could well be on their way, even though the US has acknowledged that the EU poses no problem and in fact shares many common challenges. On top of the ongoing investigation on lumber, the US has recently launched new Section 232 investigations based on national security grounds on pharmaceutical products and pharmaceutical ingredients, semiconductors, including semiconductor manufacturing equipment, critical minerals, also covering processed critical minerals and their derivative products, and most recently on trucks and truck parts. This makes in total 6 additional ongoing investigations. If all these investigations lead to unjustified harmful tariffs, then another 170 billion euros of EU exports to the EU would be impacted. This means that in total, around 549 billion euros of EU exports to the US, meaning 97% of the total, would be subject to tariffs. In the terms of duties collected, this will be massive. In 2024, the US collected around 7 billion euros in duties on EU exports. The projection is that the US might now collect as much as 100 billion euros if the ongoing investigations result in tariffs. And as you know, just yesterday, we learned about new possible 100% tariff on non-US film production. So I believe that you would agree with me that the situation as such is not acceptable, and we cannot afford to stay idle, and this brings me to our response. Honourable members, we are not facing these headwinds on autopilot. As you know, President von der Leyen has entrusted me to engage with the US administration to try and find fair and mutually beneficial negotiated solution and return to a constructive trade relationship. I am in constant contact with my US interlocutors for this purpose. In order to get these negotiations up and running, we have been scoping out the possibility to reduce barriers, not raise them, including by proposing to agree on 0 tariffs for all industrial goods, including in strategic industrial sectors such as cars and car parts, jointly addressing global overcapacities in strategic industrial sectors such as steel and aluminium, jointly increasing the resilience of EU and US supply chains in sectors such as semiconductors and pharmaceuticals, and securing a return to barrier-free transatlantic trade and reviving our cooperation. So the EU has made clear that we are ready to discuss and we are ready to find mutually beneficial solutions respecting our interest and regulatory autonomy. We now need the US to show its readiness to make progress towards a fair and balanced solution. And I have already shared the approach with my US counterparts as a basis for further engagement. We are fully engaged in discussion with the US as a negotiated solution remains our clear and preferred outcome. But if our talks with the US do not yield the necessary result, we will be ready for alternative with the aim of restoring a level playing field. Therefore, we are also using the 90-day pause to continue our preparation for further rebalancing measures to counter the multitude of additional US tariffs on EU exports and ensure a level playing field in the longer term. And here I would like to underline that all options remain on the table. We are also preparing for litigation to preserve and reinforce the multilateral rules-based trading system. At the same time, we are monitoring possible risk of trade diversion by the way of dedicated import surveillance task force, where the aim is to protect the EU market from possible surges of imports from other countries that are also hit by US tariffs and which seek alternative markets. The first results of this work are anticipated in mid-May. The Commission stands ready, if necessary, to use all available tools in our trade defence instrument toolbox in a rapid manner to protect the EU single market, EU producers and EU consumers. We will also, honourable members, continue diversifying our trade and investment ties with partners around the globe. This includes making the most of our expansive network of trade agreements with 76 countries across the globe, covering almost half of our trade, and doubling down on our efforts to finalise ongoing negotiations. Here, we know that countries around the world are looking at the EU as a trusted, reliable and predictable trading partner. In the current global environment, it is in everyone's interest to expand their network and strengthen their supply routes. For us, it is nothing less than a prerequisite for our competitiveness and our economic security that we find new markets for our exporters and new sources of imports. And it also helps double down on rules-based trade while we continue to push for proper multilateral governance with the WTO as its core. The US represents 30% of global trade. It's a lot. But we must not forget about the remaining 87%. And therefore, work continues internally towards the adoption of signature of agreements with Mercosur and Mexico. These are perfect examples of deals we have made that can deliver hugely on our bid for diversification, to open new markets and further important geopolitical relations build up, while also securing key commitments on issues of climate change and sustainability. They offer significant opportunities for EU businesses and high potential for EU consumers. There is still work to be done to get them over the line. However, I count on the support of this House to ensure successful outcomes for the benefit of all. And to conclude, Mr. President, I also would like to inform the honourable members that we are accelerating dramatically our ongoing negotiations with India. We had very successful meetings just last week. Indonesia, where I had the important VTC yesterday, Philippines, Thailand, and Malaysia. As you know, we launched the free trade agreement talks with the United Arab Emirates, something which I believe could serve as a strong catalyst to advance our cooperation with the Gulf cooperation countries with whom we are also negotiating strategic partnership agreements. So while we are pushing our FTA agenda forward, we are also making use of other more flexible forms of engagement tailor-made to our own needs and those of our respective partners, covering specific sectors and deepening our bilateral relations. Let me just conclude by highlighting that we are working very closely with Angola in implementing Sustainable Investment Facilitation Agreement which entered into force in 2024, and we are working closely with our partners on critical raw materials, but also on the digital trade agreements reached with South Africa earlier this year and with Singapore, which I will be signing there on behalf of the EU this week. We are working very closely with South Africa also to advance our clean trade and investment partnership to strengthen our clean supply chains, which we hope to conclude by the end of 2025. My last point would be appeal to all of us, and I would like to thank the Polish presidency for excellent cooperation on making sure that our unity is unshakable, that we act as one if it comes to these very important trade negotiations, because this is as vital as ever. And I would say that this is the time to act in unequivocal terms for the EU's interest and towards our goal of maintaining strong and competitive economy as well as cohesive society. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you very much, honourable members.
Ďakujem, pán komisár. A teraz by som poprosil.
And now the first speaker on behalf of a political group for the EPP group, Mr. Warborn.
Thank you, Vice President, Minister, Commissioner, colleagues. We find ourselves at historic crossroads, not just in terms of economic policy, but also in the broader context of global geopolitics. Trade tension, of course, is nothing new. But today, in an era of deep globalization and tightly interlinked supply chains, the consequences are more far-reaching than ever. We have seen this clearly in the past months, when Trump's erratic trade measures triggered volatility across financial markets. The EU response, especially in the face of the unjustified trade measures from a long-standing ally, will be remembered. Our approach must strike a careful balance, preserving the principle of trust, respect, and transatlantic cooperation, while also shielding European citizens and industries from economic harm. I therefore call on the Commission to act decisively within their 90 days retaliatory pause. The current pause from the Trump administration is de facto a 25% tariff on EU steel, aluminium and automobiles, and a 10% tariff on almost all other goods. The Commission's decision to hold off on immediate retaliation is wise. De-escalation creates a space for dialogue. But let us be clear, inaction cannot become our policy. Within these 90 days, we must prepare a strong, a measured, and a unified response. And at the same time, we must do three things to strategically position Europe, and that is strengthen the single market, negotiate and ratify more free trade agreements, not least Mercosur and the Mexico one, and then reasserting leadership within WTO, because we need the rules-based international system when there is unpredictable in the world. Thank you.
Ďakujem pekne. Pardon.
Thank you, Mr. Barbour. Now, on behalf of the Socialists and Democrats group, Ms. García Pérez.
Gracias.
Thank you, President. Dear Commissioner Šefčovič, Donald Trump and his vision of the world are a direct threat not just to trade, international trade, but also to the values that underpin our democracies. His trade war against the EU with unjustified tariffs threatens our industries, and his constant threats is the sign of an authoritarian economic policy that despises international trade and cooperation amongst equals. Together with his partners from the far right within the European Union and outside of the Union, they don't believe in laws. They believe that might is right. And faced with this, we cannot give in. We are here to firmly defend the European model, a model based on social justice, on the rule of law, and which puts people at the heart of the economy. The European Union has to respond firmly. Our response has to be displayed on various fronts, protecting our workers, our consumers, our companies, the defence of the international order that's based on rules through the WTO, which needs to be reformed and to be strong. And we need to negotiate from a position of strength with Trump without giving in to any kind of blackmail. We have the tools, but we have to use them when necessary if this threat continues to exist. We have to adopt sanctions on companies that don't comply with our laws, and we have to react against this threat and blackmail from the US. We also have to reform the single market. We have to encourage internal demand and to help with direct aid for industry, for the regions most affected by this trade war. And we shouldn't forget that the world is larger than Trump. 80% of our exports actually go to other markets. Let's strengthen our agreements with Japan, Canada, Mexico. Let's make progress on Mercosur, on India and our partners in sub-Saharan Africa. Let's diversify our supply chain and make sure that the EU becomes a world leader in fair trade, sustainable trade. But then there's an issue that's fundamental, and that is there are some points that are not up for negotiation. The rule of law is not up for negotiation. European legislation is not up for legislation. We are unique in the world, and this is what made us different and strong. And we can't accept blackmail, which will mean that Europe changes its legislation. We've made so much progress in ensuring prosperity, in ensuring equality, and ensuring sustainability. The European Union can't be held hostage to electoral fears. We have to, in fact, make a choice now. Do we want to be a strong, sovereign world voice, Or do we just want to be bystanders, subject to the whims of a multi-millionaire demagogue who despises what the European project stands for? Ladies and gentlemen, we're at a turning point. This is the time for us to raise our voice, to proudly defend the European project, and to prove that when faced with chaos, the European Union is the hope for a fair, democratic and sustainable order. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. A teraz
Thank you. And now for the Patriots for Europe Group, Mr. Bardella.
Merci, Monsieur le.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Commissioner. There was no effort to anticipate what happened. No effort was made, but Europe seems to be discovering something which was announced clearly a long time ago in line with Trump's project. He promised to use tariffs as a weapon to ensure that both his rivals and competitors pay the price. This now affects practically all sectors. Across the board, the President of the United States has been creating uncertainty and doubt for our businesses. So the time isn't one where we should be regretting things. We should be responding. We should be defending our economic interests. In the short term, we're fully entitled to respond with graduated tariffs. This is an excellent way to step up the pressure to ensure that we can negotiate a way back to normality. The European market involves 450 million consumers. It would be incomprehensible if we were to simply stand aside and do nothing. Another option would, of course, be a clear break with the decisions taken by the European Commission. We are now in a period marked by confrontation. In this area, Europe cannot remain the only power which continues to respect rules of courtesy which nobody else respects. Facing major powers, including emerging powers, in an increasingly unsure and dangerous world, my advice to you is it's time to wake up. It's time to wake up, otherwise our farmers will disappear. Wake up, or our automotive industry will be closing down. Our metallurgy industry is suffering even more. The steel industry, ArcelorMittal, where the workers are being punished by absurd rules. Wake up so as to ensure that we can set out clear strategic objectives for our continent. Our objective must be to ensure that we reduce dependency on foreign partners for vital materials, in particular for defence. All the binding rules of the new Green Deal, underpinned by punitive ecology, must be removed so as to ensure that our businesses, and in particular our farmers, can do their job producing. European rules on the electricity market must be reformed, and nuclear power must play a major role in our energy mix. National and European preference should apply when it comes to public procurement, in particular in defence, but in other areas as well. It's time to wake up and to abandon your naivety. Otherwise, all the countries of Europe will simply be wiped off the map of history.
Teraz poprosím za Európsky.
And now, on behalf of the European Conservatives and Reformists, Mr. Procaccini.
Thank you, President. We Conservatives believe in a free market, which will benefit both producers and consumers, those that are the most talented. We have to admit that the tariffs policy has also been a European policy, and we haven't just applied it to those who break trade rules like China, but to precious allies like American citizens. Just one example. Until a few weeks ago, the US applied a 2.5% tariff to European automobiles. The EU applied a 10% tariff to US cars. So we need an agreement of genuine free trade with the US, 0% on both sides. And what Maloney discussed with Trump in Washington should be part of a general framework which would preserve the unity of the West, and the balance of trade with the US isn't just a political issue, it's a trade one. The LNG Russian gas scandal is emblematic of the hypocrisy of the EU, and Commissioner Jorgensen seems determined to, in fact, extend this. look at who has most enriched Russia through the sale of LNG. Let's look at Orban and Macron with an 81% increase in LNG purchases over the last few years. And the green country of Sanchez, too. Look at the increases in LNG gas. So these are hurts that the EU has actually imposed on itself through the Green Deal, and that has damaged its competitiveness, and that's what we need to reverse now, rather than having trade deals with illiberal regimes like North Korea.
And now for the Renew Europe group, Valérie Ayé, you have the floor. Thank you, Mr. President, Vice President, Minister, colleagues. We're saying goodbye to the old world, and there's a new one coming along, together with its monsters, in the form of Donald Trump's trade war. This is a tremendous threat to the European Union and to our economies. It's also a political challenge, a confrontation of two models. The new American administration has its model of protectionism, brutality, and populism. And then there's our model, our European model of freedom, the rule of law, and democracy. Make America Great Again is a full frontal attack on multilateralism and a Europe of 27 states playing the game of cooperation. It's an attack on everything that we've built since the end of the Second World War. Colleagues, an orderly global trade is a tool of global peace, and yet Donald Trump has decided to declare a tariff war on the whole world, with the exception of Russia and North Korea. There are three things I want to say to the American president. First of all, this trade war isn't going to help anybody. It's certainly not going to help the American consumers who are going to carry the can. Second, Europe will always be a fair and reliable trade partner which respects international law. Thirdly, and if we are going to test our respective strengths, then let's go. We have all the tools in the trade box to defend ourselves. That's our position without closing the door to negotiation, but the European Commission must be ready to use all the tools in that box. Everyone has to take a stand on Trumpism, including people in this chamber. Many people want a French-flavoured Trumpism or a European form of Trumpism. We've heard some of that today in favour of protectionism and closing borders. I think it's time for you people to open your eyes. It doesn't work. Look what's happening. It cannot work. What we're defending here is regulated global trade, international trade agreements based on reciprocity, which don't put our farmers or our industry in jeopardy. These are agreements which enable us to diversify in terms of sourcing natural resources. It's a guarantee of prosperity in the future. And colleagues, Europe is anything but weak. We have 450 million consumers. This is a very attractive market for all sorts of countries that want to strengthen their relations with us. We have a legislative and regulatory framework which is reassuring to investors. So don't worry about the monsters. Europe should stay on its path, and we should lay the foundations of a new European Union fit for the future. Thank you.
Merci. A teraz poprosím.
Thank you. And the next speaker for the Greens European Free Alliance is Mr. Eickhout.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Minister. Let's be very clear. The illegal tariffs that are imposed and announced by the Trump administration will not only hurt Europeans, it will also hurt US consumers and businesses. Trump is playing a stupid but dangerous game. And if the current negotiations do not work, and the Commissioner already said it, the EU has to show its strength and retaliate firmly. We have the instruments to do so. It comes down to political will and leadership. We should not back down to a bully. Important in our reaction is solidarity amongst EU member states because it's key. We will have to stay united, and therefore the money raised by countermeasures should be invested to support the affected sectors in all countries in order to keep the unity. However, we have to be smarter than just bashing Trump on his favorite word. We need to develop a strategy that will make Europe stronger and more resilient in a new, chaotic world we are living in. A strategy that should build on the Green Deal that we have put in as a forward-looking and future-oriented strategy. But on top of that, we need to have 3 principles in mind. First, we need to build European. We are overly dependent on US energy, defense, financial and digital services. Only strong and common European alternatives can provide us the operating room we need. We need joint investments in those sectors. We need joint EU borrowing measures. Secondly, we need to buy European. In the past months, the European consumers showed the way in showing how you do not buy further Teslas. We should learn from them and use local content requirements and resilience criteria and give preference to European products and services. And thirdly, we need to protect European. Our values, our industry, they will only survive if we act and protect, if we apply our digital rights to the letter, if we stop dumping on the EU market. We will work together with those that still value our rules-based system. That let be our strategy. Build European, buy European, protect European. Europe needs to stop thinking as a market and start acting as a power to do good. Thank you.
Ďakujem a teraz
Thank you. And now on behalf of the left group, Mr. Shirdavan. Thank you, Mr. President. In the first 100 days of his presidency, Donald Trump has managed to generate chaos in international trade. We can see the consequences for the economy and the population. Economic performance is declining, prices are increasing. Working people will be the ones who pay the bill, people who have the least money in their pockets in the first place. And this is no coincidence. The right-wing populist Trump is deliberately defending the interests of his economic allies, the US energy sector, the arms industry, and big tech. The Commission doesn't seem to have understood this. We are in a global trade war. Trade policy is being used as a weapon to pursue economic interests and carve out spheres of interests. Europe needs a clear strategy against that to protect the European economy and European jobs. And that means massive investment in our industry. We need strategic independence for the European Union. And now you too, Commissioner, know that the initial Commission strategy, sticking your head in the sand thinking it's not going to be too bad, that was naive. And now you want a Trump-style deal. And if that doesn't work, then you've got countermeasures up your sleeve. So, carrot and stick. I understand you want to buy more US fracking gas instead of strengthening the energy independence of the European Union. You're going to create new dependence on fossil fuels, and that is economically, environmentally, and socially wrong. And it's very difficult to see what pressure is being brought to bear on the United States. Where is the tough regulation of big tech? Where is the digital tax? You seem not to want to go down that road. Apparently, you are simply interested in helping Elon Musk. It's now time to look to our partners, Canada, Mexico, Japan, South Korea, and China, to create a new world trade order based on fair trade instead of untrammeled free trade. And things like the agreement with Rwanda, which is leading to war in the Congo, is not the way to go. We also have seen that the people of Europe don't want TTIP, Mercosur. These agreements are bad for social standards, environment, and agriculture. So we need a solution that doesn't help oligarchs, but one that helps the population at large and democracy. Thank you. And the next speaker for the Europe of Sovereign Nations is Mr. Aust.
Meine sehr geehrten
Ladies and gentlemen, anybody who depends on external suppliers is unable to fully to be independent in trade. This isn't a chance occurrence. The old efforts by over the decades have meant that Europe has depended on the United States for its defence. That was understandable and naive. We now see the result of this. Europe is now being blackmailed. Donald Trump's government is trying to force Europe to buy more and more fracked gas, while at the same time forcing ever higher energy prices at the cost of our industry, our families, and our prosperity. This has also displayed in the pushing and shoving which we've seen in European politics for many years regarding Donald Trump. The result of this is neither Brussels, Berlin, or Paris are able to provide trustworthy partners when it comes to negotiating with Trump. There are other more reliable partners, Orban, Meloni, patriotic governments who have maintained good contacts with Trump. However, this all goes far beyond America. Other trade opportunities are being destroyed, with us lecturing China, India, and great swathes of Africa. Rather, partnership. We've tried to impose ideas about democracy and the climate on these countries. And what we sorely lack now is partners such as these countries so as to enable us to have a stronger position in negotiations with the US. Somebody who has no alternatives has no power in negotiations. The European establishment has, through its arrogance, led to the isolation of Europe. If you want to understand the 21st century, it's clear that you need cooperation rather than confrontation, partnership rather than creating adversaries. Once again, we've seen a clear demonstration of the importance of the European single market. The German AfD has always recognised this. Our motto is Germany first, but not Germany alone. Europe must speak with a single voice when it comes to questions of trade sovereignty. However, there's a precondition for this, and this precondition is that the European establishment must bring an end to trying to split us. The Commission must recognise the electoral results from Romania. Brussels should abstain from intervening in domestic matters in Hungary and stop victimising the AfD in Germany. Thank you.
Thank you, and that brings us to the end of the first round of speakers on behalf of political groups. And now blue cards are available.
It's the usual courtesy of giving a bit more speaking time, a bit more tolerant towards the speakers of the political groups. But now, due to the time, we'll have to be a bit more strict. So let me give the floor to Mr. Cherba. Please.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Commissioner, Mr. Minister, dear colleagues, nowadays the world is getting increasingly less predictable. In my country, Poland, people are asking, what happens next? Should we be afraid of Russia's aggression? Are Europe's relations with the US on a crisis course? Will Europe be able to quickly boost its defense capabilities? The future of transatlantic relations depends on our current actions. This is exactly why we, as Europeans, are taking more responsibility for our security. To build defense potential requires a strong economy. The imposition of tariffs by the US on EU exports do not help. We see no justification for this. Mutual imposition of tariffs on our economies is not our shared interest. My statement as a standing rapporteur on US is crystal clear. Transatlantic cooperation is beneficial for both sides of the Atlantic. whether we talk about security or economy. No other economies in the world are integrated in such an advanced way. The EU and the US are the largest trade and investment partners. Together we will represent 30% of global trade in goods and services. Therefore, the trade wars will not benefit either side. That is why we cannot stop engaging in building strong dialogue. But let me be clear in here. The imposition of tariffs will not only hurt Europeans, American businesses will be affected too. Thank you very much.
Dziękuję bardzo. A teraz poproszę.
Thank you very much. And now Ms. Van Bremt has the floor.
Thank you very much, dear Commissioner, colleagues. The US, once the greatest defender of liberal democracy, is rapidly becoming an authoritarian regime. And this is a huge challenge, but also an opportunity for the European Union. It's time to show our strength. And that's why we should support the WTO and intensify our contacts and trade with like-minded countries like UK, Canada, and look for new sustainable partnerships in Asia and Latin America. And of course, we need to negotiate, but not at all costs. Dear Commissioner, can you guarantee that our legislation is not up for discussion with the US? And why are the tariffs on US services still not yet on the table? I think we need answers to that. And above all, dear colleagues, the Trump show should not distract us from doing what is needed for Europe. That means providing support for workers, implementing the Green Deal, and to invest in our strategic economy. Because the world, dear colleagues, need urgently a united and independent Europe to lead the way. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Bucha de Villalba.
Thank you, President. This isn't about tariffs or trade war. It's who is responsible for the death of European economy. Not only do we have a free trade order that's in danger, trades, import duties, regulatory barriers, they're the real worry. You didn't say anything about China's dumping months ago. Brussels has spent decades actually raising barriers against our companies, and we've left trade in the hands of China and South Korea. The socialists and the populists are actually responsible. There's no water in southern Spain, but we, in fact, invest in hydro in other countries. You've set up speculative companies for CO2 emissions, which damage our countries. And again, we have non-tariff barriers. You meddle in boards by determining who should sit on them in terms of gender. But you have actually spent our money on renewables, and we don't have the luxury of that now. You think free trade is giving in to China. It's agreements with countries that don't meet the standards we have to. Of course, we reject any kind of tariffs set on our producers, but above all, we also reject your Green Deal and 2030 agenda and your fanatical support for climate change.
The next speaker is Mr. Bielan.
Commissioner, let me start by thanking Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni for making the strategic decision to visit Washington at a critical moment for our transatlantic relations. While others choose ambiguity, she acted, because leadership means showing up. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said for the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, who continues to block President Duda's initiative to hold a long-overdue EU-US summit in Warsaw under Polish presidency in the Council. This is a missed opportunity, both symbolically and politically. Cancelling the summit sends the wrong signal to our most important ally, especially as global tensions rise and our need for unity grows. Yes, we may have disagreements with the US on trade, subsidies and regulatory divergence, but the answer should not be retaliation. The answer should be pragmatic engagement. We need a common strategic European response that both protects our interests and strengthens our partnership. Thank you.
Ďakujem. A teraz poprosím.
Thank you. And the next speaker is Ms. Karlsbro.
Herr talman, kommissionär Šefčovič.
Mr. President, Commissioner Šefčovič, colleagues. The best way of dealing with Trump is for Europe to be strong. It's for Europe to do what it can in defense of democracy, rule of law, equality, liberalism, to make the world a better place. President Trump, as American president, is doing everything he can to pull up the drawbridge, end relations with allies, start a trade war, and enter into a trade experiment which is going to be at the expense of our personal finances and our pensions. A Europe under threat from Putin has to be a united Europe, a Europe that can defend itself. We need a strong Europe, a strong Ukraine. If Trump is trying to divide Europe, now is the time to strengthen Europe and our own internal market. We have the greatest network of international trade relations. Trump does not. The next speaker is Ms. Cavazzini.
Lieber Herr Kommissar, liebe Kollegen.
Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, I'm deeply concerned that Trump's trade war is destroying jobs, it's pushing prices up, and above all in the United States. I am also extremely concerned that in the United States itself, there is a far-right power grab. The rule of law and human rights are simply being abolished. This is why it's important that in the face of such chaos, the European Union act in a united way. We are the greatest economic power in the world, and we shouldn't forget that. Let us not be sidetracked by the current pause in the tariffs. Trump's war continues. This is why we have to enact it in a targeted way if the current tariffs aren't removed. This should start by targeted taxation and measures against digital giants. We have to act together, but we must not water down our regulation. This certainly applies to big tech as it does to farming and metals and rules on methane, on gas. I don't think it's good for us to increase imports. At the same time, must we ensure that we have robust measures to prevent any diversion of trade from China. It's true we have to diversify our trade partnerships. What matters above all, in my view, however, is that we strengthen the internal market and demand. Let us be clear. Trump's tariff policy cannot be an excuse for us to throw out our standards when it comes to new trade agreements. We shouldn't open up our industries to unfair competition. We should never forget that in the United States, there is an enormous amount of dissatisfaction about globalization. We shouldn't allow the same thing to spread here in Europe.
Thank you. Next speaker, Ms. Aubry.
Monsieur le Commissaire.
Commissioner, with the trade war triggered off by Donald Trump, we are undergoing an historical upheaval. And the first thing we have to do is to have the courage to raise our voice against a US president who's violating international law. Secondly, you should refuse to give in to his blackmail, adding all these tariffs, promising us to sell us peace while at the same time allowing us to dig our own grave. We should also forget the idea of signing new trade agreements with the US, not to mention Mercosur, Thailand, Japan, and so on. So, he hits you and you turn the other cheek. So all we're saying basically boils down to long live free trade. Let's forget that we need the rest of the world as if we've learned nothing from this crisis. And once again, the people who are the prize, it's the same each time. Workers, the industries which you're selling out. Commissioner, never before has the blind alley which capitalism and international trade find themselves in. Let's finally recognise this and abandon this deadly system.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Bistron.
Liebe Kolleginnen, liebe Kollegen.
Colleagues, Make America Great Again is clearly a declaration of war on the whole world and on Europe. The American president is concerned for the Americans. Of course, he wants jobs for American people. He wants prosperity for the American people, and he wants industry back in the United States. And what do we hear here? Trump, Trump, Trump. It's enough for one man to put the whole European Parliament in a tizzy. Instead of complaining about Trump, think about when you last did something for your voters in the way that Trump is doing for his. The question is justified because Trump's reaction is just a logical consequence of the last few decades. Jobs have been drifting from the United States, from Europe, to countries with cheap labor. And the Americans have felt that, our people have felt that. In the electronics industry, in the automotive industry, and now it's the turn of the farmers. Do we now want a trade war? Do we want artificially more expensive imports? Of course we don't. We want free trade. Europe is competitive, and not just the European Union, but Europe as a whole. We have the best educated people. We have innovative industry. We have natural resources on this continent. We can survive in this competition. But we have to take off the shackles. We have to get rid of the Green Deal. We have to reduce the taxes. We have to roll back regulation. The time is to make Europe great again. The next speaker is Mr. De Masi.
Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren.
Ladies and gentlemen, the US President Donald Trump is attempting to use punitive tariffs to blackmail us. He wants to force us to mine more of his dirty fracked gas or to slow down the disappearance of US industry. The European Union is only conditionally able to defend itself. In Germany, for example, we have the largest economy in Europe, and we've been in a recession for 3 years. And these energy prices have damaged us far more than Putin could ever do, and this has affected the less well-off in society disproportionately. And we are now allowing the United States to get their hands on rare earths from Ukraine. The transformation to green steel will be impossible if energy prices remain so high. This is why we have to look carefully at what we can do to ensure that we can buy our energy from the cheapest supplier. That would be the best response to Donald Trump, to ensure that he can't blackmail us while at the same time opening a window for peace in Ukraine. We need more public investment. It's completely insane that we have all this discussion and talk shows about Volkswagen building tanks instead of cars. What we need is taxes and levies on big tech companies to protect our own medium-sized businesses.
Mr. Schipper, do you accept it? Yes. Mr. Schipper, you have 30 seconds.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege.
Thank you, colleague, for accepting the blue card. You said that we should start buying our energy from the cheapest supplier once again. I presume you mean the Russians by this. Despite the Russian war of aggression, despite Russian war crimes, despite the deportation of hundreds of thousands of children. So without asking you to answer those specific questions, perhaps you could try to give us a better understanding of the moral issues at stake here. What can an energy supplier do so as to ensure that we can buy his energy again? the question of ethics and morality means that we should be examining what is the best way of bringing the war in Ukraine to a rapid end. If we in Europe shoot ourselves in the foot economically itself, we achieve nothing. Remember what happened after the Iraq War. We didn't take sanctions against the United States because we shot ourselves in the foot. It's a question of logic. We have to ensure that we pursue policies which serve the interests of the people in Europe. And if they bring about the wrong economic results, the tool of sanctions would be a potential way of opening a truce. We have to prevent this war going on forever. We have to bring an end to the bloodshed.
Very much, and excuse me because I should have not given the floor to Mr. Schipper because he belongs to the same group as Mr. Massey, which is the non-adscripts group. So sorry for giving him the blue card. No, thank you. It's very clear in the rules. Es el tiempo del señor Zoido.
President, ladies and gentlemen, tariffs are a disaster, no surprise. That's Economics 101, and the WTO has confirmed that. It's clear. Prices have increased by roughly 12% for consumers. If that continues, we will see around $130 million being the price for this per year. And we're seeing this in jobs being cut on the other side of the Atlantic. So it's clear tariffs are a failure. And that means that Mr. Trump's suspending them made sense. It's necessary for him and the US, but that's not enough, really. We need to ensure they're really done away with, including the 10% tariff that we still have. We can't allow the tariff threat to hang over our head like a sword of Damocles. We can't continue to jeopardize the economic survival of thousands of European companies. Thank you, Mr. Fader. Mr. Lange.
Dankeschön, Herr Vorsitzender, Herr Kommissar, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen. Es geht.
Thank you, Mr. President, Commissioner, colleagues. We need to defend, we need to enlarge, and we need to negotiate. We have to defend ourselves with all the tools in the box. With countermeasures, we need to expand trade agreements with different parts of the world, and I'm glad to hear the news about Indonesia, and we really need to ratify quickly so as to have a network. And we have to negotiate, of course we do, because we want to avoid escalation. But we have to make clear that these tariffs are illegal and they have to be abolished. It's not 2.5% or 10%, there's 25% on light utility vehicles in the USA. We have to negotiate. These illegal tariffs have to go, and we shouldn't allow anyone to call our legislation into question. And we agree to go with you, but the Parliament must be allowed to approve the mandate.
Our next speaker is Madame Blika.
Dziękuję, panie przewodniczący, panie komisarzu.
President, Commissioner. We have to deal now with the threat from America to Europe's consumers and Europe's economy. Europe's competitiveness has declined. The European economy has been developing more slowly than the American economy. We need more innovation. Bureaucracy is putting investors off, and we cannot really refer to economic sovereignty, and the answer can't be more regulation, more green transformation, rather than more jobs. We have to develop Europe's industry, defend our market, and ensure that there's a level playing field in relations with all countries, including the United States. the EU should stop being an ideological laboratory and it should turn into a real economic power. To do that, we have to stop the policies of the left-leaning liberal majority. The Mercosur agreement should go into the dustbin. It's a threat to Europe's food production. Europe's biggest ally and partner in NATO remains the United States. That should be our focus.
Thank you, President. Trade wars. There's no point in them. The US administration has actually suspended its tariffs, and that's a positive message. It's vital that we continue negotiations with the US, as Giorgia Meloni suggested in Washington. Let's go back to the negotiating table and let's have a fair, constructive discussion. To negotiate, we shouldn't be complaining about others. We need to look at how we work internally. We need to relaunch the European economy. For years, we've abandoned and penalised strategic industries. The chemical industry, the steel industry, the automotive industry. We've lost dynamism. We've become less competitive on world markets. And this is something we did to ourselves. Without a competitive economy in recovery, we won't be strong around the negotiating table. We need agreements with new partners. We need to protect ourselves from unfair practices of third countries. We need to be concrete, pragmatic. We need to listen to our entrepreneurs. We need to hold our head high without prejudices or ideology. Europe is moving in this direction. Thank you, sir. Madam Hahn.
Unser Ziel muss doch ganz
Clearly, our main objective must be to protect free trade. At the same time, however, the European Union must maintain the elbow room to fight back with the tools we have. Somebody such as Donald Trump only recognises force, and this should help us find a solution. At the same time, we should finally make the most of the opportunities which we have. Trade policy must always be pragmatic, rather than acting as an ersatz, a replacement for a lack of EU foreign policy. We have to work hard to conclude agreements with India, Mexico, and, of course, those countries which haven't yet ratified the agreement with Canada must do so. I can no longer understand this ridiculous blockage of the Mercosur agreement. If Trump continues to trample all his trade partners around the world, the European Union must go back to our role as being a reliable partner, making it clear to those in other countries and blocs we want trade with them. And that should strengthen us both economically and geopolitically.
Madame Bricmont.
L'arrivée de Trump.
Trump's arrival has reminded us of a lesson we should have learnt from the pandemic. Our ultra-dependency on fossil fuels and world supply markets is going to lead to our downfall. Europe needs strategic autonomy. It needs to respond united to any tariffs, needs to not give up on our legislation, and we also need a digital tax to support companies and workers in Europe who've been affected by the tariffs. We need to look at goods aimed at the US that will now be diverted to Europe. Of course, we need to step up our partnerships with other countries affected by trade's Trump wars, but on a fair footing. And that means that we need to be guided by sustainable development. Our social, environmental and human rights are not up for grabs. And it's a not question of rushing into agreements with India, China, Mercosur, which could make the EU more dependent, more vulnerable. Let's reinforce our economy. Let's ensure we reduce our energy dependency, that we work on our autonomy, and we need a transition towards genuine European autonomy. Thank you.
Madame Boylan.
Thank you. Madame Boylan.
Commissioner, when it comes to the EU's response to Trump's tariffs, it's essential that all member states, including smaller ones like Ireland, are taken into consideration. The collective response must be one that protects workers, that funds and encourages upskilling, and that does not pursue the same anti-worker, anti-environment, Trump-light deregulation agenda. We also cannot exploit this crisis to increase LNG imports or to advance trade deals like Mercosur or the ratification of CETA. Deforestation, food laden with chemicals and corporate courts won't protect workers in Europe, but it will protect the profits of the few. Now is the time for fair, sustainable trade, which does not leave us exposed to the whims of oligarchs or serve the interests of corporates. Instead, it serves the interests of workers and families in Europe.
Thank you, Madam. Mr. Schipper.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, we are not a group, the non-attached. That goes against the very nation. Huh? Sorry?
You are losing.
I know. Just I wanted to say this. We are not the group, yeah? Dear people of Europe, Dobry den, Pan Kommissar, in the Intercommittee you told us we will give the US 2 weeks and then we will respond. It has been over a month now. And the US tariffs are still in place while we impose our tactical delay. That means one of two things. Either you lied to this parliament, which I don't want to believe, or you don't know Donald Trump, which I fear is even worse. Maybe I lack the brilliance to grasp the Commission's plan, but I promise you this, if I don't understand it, the public does neither. And to those on the left, like Mr. Shirdevan, who's gone unfortunately, a China that looks Uyghurs into concentration camps is not our partner and never can be. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schipper. I'm going to read the rules of procedure that say that the members raising the blue card and the speaker shall not be from the same political group, and they shall not both be non-attached members. Exactly is what the rules are saying. Remember it for the next time. Our next speaker is Madame Meidel.
Thank you, Chair, Commissioner, dear colleagues. Business people know that trade relies on two fundamentals: economic incentive and also trust. When it comes to economic incentives, the numbers in trade volumes between the EU and the US speak for themselves. Just last year, the US-EU goods trade hit a record of $976 billion. But the trust in rules, commitments, in partners, is shaken on both sides of the Atlantic. Economic nationalism does not make you first, but it makes you alone. And this is no leadership. This is volatility masqueraded as strength. And when we speak about strengths, the numbers are clear. And Europe can respond with resolve, but our priority is principal openness, because we are not the Democratic Party. We are an ally. Thank you.
Thank you, Madame Meidel. Mr. Benifei.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Commissioner Šefčovič. The real objective of the illegal tariffs imposed by Donald Trump is just one: to destroy the European economic model, to undermine our standards, how we protect what we eat, our nature, and what our approach is to tech giants. We should send back a clear message. Our legislation is something which we in Europe decide for Europeans. So over the next few months, we'll be negotiating to find a way out of this damaging situation for economies on both sides of the Atlantic. Our trade envoy will be going to Washington at the end of May. We need to find a good agreement. But if we aren't able to do that, we should be in a position to respond with strong measures against US services and goods. The European Union should form alliances with all those countries who want to uphold the international rules-based alliance while pursuing new alliances. This is the umpteenth challenge we've faced, underlining the need for a stronger and more united Europe.
Madame Yuri.
Tisztelt képviselőtársaim, a jelenlegi...
Dear colleagues, in these turbulent times, we need to keep a strategic calm Rather than rushing to do anything, we need to coolly assess what European interests are. Obviously, a trade war damages the interests of our citizens, our companies, industry, and has effects on our supply chain. It increases prices and puts pressure on our companies. And obviously, we have tried to correct this course too late. I think we have moved too far away from the rules that we should have been following on just who does what in Brussels and national governments. Now, we need to be open to innovative solutions. We're negotiating with businessmen. We have to negotiate as businessmen. We need to put our house in order, obviously. We need clearer, simpler, less rules, and we need to bring an end to the 5 years of ideological defence that we've had. Instead, we need to defend the single market and farmers so that the EU can remain open to all, and as such we can recover our competitiveness and we can once again be serious actors on the international scene.
Thank you very much, colleagues. So how should the European Union react to the US tariffs? No, not by punishing Trump, but by starting to develop the European economy. The EU's economic space is a labyrinth of directives and regulations. This stifles entrepreneurship, puts off investors, and hampers economic growth. Once upon a time, Europe was an advocate of market economics. Now it's drifting towards a socialist command economy. Businesses currently spend more time on compliance with regulatory requirements than they do on product development. Many companies are abandoning plans for expansion because they cannot bear the costs of complying with the directives. Investors prefer to put their money into countries where risks are lower and regulations make more sense. We shouldn't allow bureaucracy to replace the spirit of entrepreneurship. Historically, it's freedom which brought innovation, created jobs and prosperity. Europe has the potential to lead the global economy as long as it restores faith in the free market. That means trusting business. That means lighter and more flexible regulation. That means fewer directives and more freedom to decide. Among other things, it also means stopping the Green Deal. Only then can we defend Europe's economic interests and our citizens' prosperity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Madison. Mr. Kassar.
Monsieur le Commissaire.
Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, Donald Trump's return to the White House has undermined multilateralism, overthrown the rules of international trade, and destabilized supply chains. Tariffs have become an economic weapon. Globalization, modernization, which used to be a source of prosperity, is now proven to be the opposite. It's now the power rules and certain political leaders are showing a lack of reliability. In the face of these changes, we have to strengthen our trade agreements to make them more balanced, protecting our vital interests, our values, while at the same time securing strategic autonomy. International trade is more than just volumes, quotas, and tariffs. We have to better understand once again the need for comparative advantage to make trade meaningful. Trade should be a value, a form of stability, enabling human beings to progress and find better prosperity.
Dear Minister, dear Commissioner, dear colleagues, the recent US tariffs don't just hit our exports, they strike at the heart of what should be fair and trusted partnership. Over 500 billion worth of EU goods could be affected. And behind that figure, there are real people, our workers, our businesses, and the values that we stand for. And the only correct response is with unity, with calm and with purpose. Yes, we have introduced proportionate countermeasures, but we are also keeping the door widely open for a dialogue, for an honest dialogue, offering to boost imports of US goods by 50 billion to help restore balance. Still, this is much more than just dispute. It's about Europe shaping its own path, building stronger, more diverse partnerships, and standing up for a global trade system based on rules and mutual respect. Across Europe, people also reacted. People are frustrated, boycotts and anti-American sentiment are rising, but our message is clear. We want solutions, not a trade war. And if the US is ready to negotiate, so are we. If not, Europe will stand tall, united, and turn this challenge into an opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sinkevicius. Our next speaker is Mr. Tritico.
President, colleagues, Commissioner. Trump's trade policy does, in fact, follow a logic whereby a deficit is a threat. The US imported around 157 million euros of goods from the EU, but let's look at services. It's the US that has a similar surplus in that field. Shows us how complicated economics is. We have to look at it as a whole. Tariffs have been suspended at the moment, but US companies, digital in particular, make exorbitant profits. It's a question of justice. We need a level playing field for this situation, and that's why we need a tax on digital services. Plus, the EU should be extending its trade links with other emerging countries, the BRICS countries, and shouldn't depend on the unilateral choices of Trump. We shouldn't forget either the repercussions of tariffs on goods. So we should also be encouraging an increase in domestic consumption. Europe needs to react strongly vis-à-vis the next round of negotiations in Washington. Thank you very much. Madam Sofko.
President, dear colleagues, war begins in the minds of the people, and it's in their minds that peace is also created. For decades, we relied heavily on American partners, and we still do for our defense and defense our trade routes, at least in the Red Sea. But with unjustified imposition of tariffs, it has become clear we must take matters in our own hands and strengthen our competitiveness. We need to simplify it, and we need to work and to attract investments. We now have a 90-day tariff pause. This is not a time to wait, it's a window of opportunity, a chance to negotiate the best possible outcome for both sides of the Atlantic, an outcome that allows business to thrive, to support millions of jobs, an outcome that strengthens, not harms our economies, one that reinforces the largest trading partnership in the world. In an era of free trade and the rules-based global order, there is no room for protectionism. Protectionism comes at a cost that must not be borne by any single industry or country alone. A change in US administration should not mean a change in the fundamental strength of our transatlantic relationship. One thing must remain clear: the United States has always been and will remain our strongest partner, ally, not one-party regime or autocracies. The European Union must continue with the calm logic that has made us the strongest single market in the world, and the logic that allows small fish to survive in turbulent waters where large fish prey. Thank you.
Madam Sofko, you have a blue card from Mr. Gratsoulis from ESN. Do you accept it? Yeah. Mr. Gratsoulis, you have the floor.
Kaip čia ir kalbėjo kolegos, Briuselis ir ne tik Briuselis per prezidento rinkimus aktyviai palaikė demokratų kandidatą.
We've heard that Brussels supported the Democrat candidate in the elections and humiliated Trump, and now the EU is doing the same thing.
Madam Sofko had no translation. Do you mind to begin again? Sorry for that. Thank you.
Gerbiama pranešėja, čia kalbėjo.
Ms. Zhovko, the colleagues who spoke before said that the European Union and Brussels supported the Democrat candidate in the US elections and humiliated Trump. And now again, people in the EU are mocking Trump. The European media are doing that. Some heads of state are doing that. Some people are saying that Trump is more dangerous than Putin. Isn't it time to say sorry to President Trump and the USA?
Please, Madam Sofko.
As a politician, I can just say that every politician and everyone at this House has responsibility for the words they say. So I never insulted anyone, so it's not mine to speak on behalf of the other politicians. And democratic words should be preserved to build peace and not war with the words. This was the beginning of my speech as well. So, I stick to the logic that insults in politics, there is no place for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam. Mr. Maniatis, you have the floor.
Dear colleagues, Trump's decision to impose 20% tariffs on European products and the trade war of €1 trillion will negatively impact both Europe and the US. We will have this pause until June. However, tariffs of 10% have already been applied, and there are also the tariffs of 25% on aluminium, steel, and cars. The EU must use this period until June so as to negotiate an agreement that will address all trade barriers on both sides of the Atlantic. At the same time, we must get ready for a possibility of not having an agreement. In that case, we will have to decide on a series of countermeasures. At the same time, we need to take measures in order to relieve our producers who are damaged by the tariffs, especially in the agri-food sector, especially olive producers and peach producers in Greece are hit by these tariffs. They must not bear the brunt of this trade war. Thank you.
Mentre l'Europa tratta sui dazi,
Well, Europe is negotiating on tariffs. The tariffs are here from Trump. And you've had years. You actually undermined manufacturing and industry through raising barriers that cost billions to industry every year, much more than the 100 billion that has been mentioned that tariffs from the US will cost. You've been very myopic with your trade policies, with the Green Deal. The effect on the automotive industry has led to job losses, people losing their purchasing power, industrial desertification. So at least Trump is, in fact, protecting the interests of his country. Do the same thing. Do away with all of the barriers that are leading to Europe to economic and industrial suicide. Otherwise, the tariffs will be the latest scapegoat, because actually we have cut our own throat and we have been incapable of providing Europe with the future it should have.
Dear colleagues, the US tariffs are harsh, but they remind us how critical it is to deepen, not weaken, our transatlantic bond. In a world of fast-moving competition, while we debate, others, especially authoritarian regimes, are moving fast to dominate emerging technologies and critical raw materials. This is a time to align. We need permanent EU trade representation, not just in Washington, but in the wider US, to identify, negotiate, and remove the barriers that still hold back the transatlantic trade. But we must do so without compromising on our standards, food, safety, security, etc. Targeted coordination on critical sectors and technologies is what we should be locking in on. That includes improving customs processing, elimination of red tape, and other measures that slow innovation on both sides of the Atlantic. And while I rarely quote Elon Musk, I'll agree with him on this. Europe and US should aim for a zero-tariff zone. So a stronger, freer trade relationship rooted in trust and common democratic ground is in both of our interests. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear colleague, Madam Karkasova.
Kolegovia, Trump.
Colleagues, Trump's decided that at Christmas, toys should be more expensive. We've got the same kind of wrong-headed policies in Slovakia under Prime Minister Fico. Our automotive industry is suffering. Our government should be defending workers and the economy. I'm glad that in Canada and Australia, politicians who believe in free trade won in the elections. We want a better entrepreneurial environment. We want to attract talent to Europe. We have to negotiate with the United States, but we want fairness in trade. There are gigantic companies that are making a killing in the European economy. Is that fair? We need to do something about it.
El señor Marzá tiene la palabra.
Gracias, señor presidente. Señor comisario.
Thank you, President. Commissioner. Trump's tariff policies are not a trade war. Above all, they are an attack on our values, on our democracy. This is a fight between oligarchy and democracies, as we've seen in two recent episodes. First of all, the rejection of your proposal, Commissioner, to create a zero tariff zone between the US and Europe. We also saw this with the rejection of the Spanish economics ministers visited, which was a response. There's direct criticism of taxes here in Europe and of our social, labour and environmental legislation. So, Commissioner, I would call on you not to give in to this blackmail. Strengthen the position of our workers and of our economy. Strengthen our environmental legislation. And above all, stop trying to deal with the Trump administration and its Trojan horse, which is the far right here in Europe. They want to divide us. So please tell us loud and clear that you won't give in to that blackmail. You defend our democracy and our values. They're not up for sale. Thank you.
Madam Anderson, you have the floor.
Honourable Chair, the US is ruled by an authoritarian president who is using trade policies as a means of coercion and political extortion. While it is clear that European workers will only lose in a full-fledged trade war, the EU should be much bolder and much more imaginative in its own response to Trump's actions. The EU should target the oligarchs that are close to Trump through action directed at Tesla and Musk, and by a digital tax aimed at the huge digital platforms. The EU should also signal its readiness to use the anti-coercion instrument. But most importantly, we need to make the European economy less dependent on US export. That means supporting internal demand in the European markets, and that means supporting real wage growth and also increasing investments. More than ever, we need to put people and workers first in our economic policy making.
Thank you very much, dear colleague. Madame Niebler, you have the floor.
Thank you, President. Vice President, Minister, ladies and gentlemen. US tariffs hit our businesses hard. The United States are our main trading partner, and millions of jobs here in Europe depend on exports. If the US administration adopts unilateral, illegitimate tariffs, thereby triggering off a trade war, we have to ensure that we close ranks and negotiate together. I think the Commission has acted correctly. They took the time to reflect. They didn't immediately retaliate. They made it willing their openness for negotiations and dialogue. However, the Commission also took preparatory measures so as to ensure that it's in a position to respond immediately to punitive tariffs if they are reinstated. It's important, I believe, to find new strategic partners, and here once again I'd like to compliment the Commission for their efforts. The Commission has been travelling around the world to conclude agreements, India, ASEAN countries, African countries. I would welcome all of those initiatives. That's the exactly right way of going about it. Congratulations, and I wish you all the best in concluding future trade agreements.
Colleague. Madame Laurenti.
Often, when talking about trade wars, we stress the part that's trade, but maybe we should be stressing war. These are the clear words of President Mattarella, a warning to not forget history, which has shown how trade hostility can lead to more serious conflicts. The trades have already started to, in fact, cause damage before the 90-day pause. Companies, workers are saying that goods are blocked imports, partly because of the uncertainty. We've been given 90 days to come up with a response, which needs to be a unified European one, to ensure that we don't have a trade war, which would have a huge impact on our exports, particularly in the agri-food sector, which in 2024 reached 30 billion euros in value. Tariffs affect strategic sectors like agriculture and products that are quality products, and also undermines all of the products that are made in Italy. The stakes are too high. We can't allow any fragmentation or divisions. We have to stand up, and how we respond to this will determine our future.
You have the floor.
Hartelijk bedankt, voorzitter.
Thank you, President. I would like to start by thanking the Commissioner Šefčovič for his efforts to reinstate or improve trade relations between the EU and US. I'm also delighted that he's put forward a proposal to work towards a zero tariff zone. However, President, the efforts are being made to try to undermine the commissioners. I see that spanners being thrown in the works elsewhere. Last week, the European Commission adopted measures against Meta and Apple, the tech giants. The Americans have said in response that they view those fines as economic barriers, which are just damaging as tariffs. So my question is simple. Don't you think it's counterproductive for the European Union to negotiate with one hand on doing away with tariffs, while at the same time, with the other hand, handing out tariffs which Washington views as fines? So, President, let's stop allowing our trade policy to be hijacked by left-wing parties who've got their obsessions about punishing big tech. Barriers to trade must be done away with exactly as should tariffs. So let's not get caught up in these economic vendettas. Thank you.
Dank u wel, voorzitter.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, Minister. The announcement from the US President regarding new trade tariffs have led to a massive wave of shock around the world, including the European Union. Within a very short period of time, we've gone from a rules-based order to international trade on the slogan, power, might is right. And that is being used to blackmail and pressure us. I would call on the Commission to ensure that we negotiate in a constructive and sure way. We should work hard to get a zero tariff zone for industrial products and improved processing of exports. That's a win-win situation for both sides. Above all, however, the European Union must not allow itself to be split, or we shouldn't be falling to the temptation of erecting barriers around our market. President, we should ensure that we remember that both economically and historically speaking, tariffs always come back like a boomerang to hit the person who instated them. Let's avoid that happening.
Mr. Cohen.
Thank you. Since the election of President Trump, I've constantly pointed out that the economic bond between Europe and the US is one of the strongest globally and of great mutual benefit, a relationship that tariffs, of course, will only damage. That is why I've repeatedly called for a strategic, measured and politically precise response to President Trump. I'm satisfied that the Commission has so far reflected this, consulting Member States when drafting its counter-tariff list and rightly deferring action following the 90-day delay to give diplomacy a chance. But should this pause end without substantive US engagement, we must be ready to respond firmly, proportionally and as one. At the same time, this uncertainty in EU and US trade has brought the urgent need to broaden our trade partnerships into sharper focus, but not at the expense of certain countries or sectors. For Ireland, where agriculture remains a vital pillar of our economy, that means ensuring the fair treatment of our farmers in any future agreement. Proposed deals, including that with the Mercosur bloc, must reflect EU values of fairness and reciprocity. As it stands, that deal unfortunately does not meet that standard. In the days and weeks ahead, I urge the Commission to remember that Europe's strength lies not in noise or brashness, but in unity, resolve and staying power. We learned that through the COVID pandemic, through Brexit and the financial crash, and I have no doubt once again we will stay the course.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. Madame Levin, you have the floor.
Herr talman, Donald Trumps tullar är...
Mr. President, Donald Trump's tariffs are bad for the world and bad also for the poorest Americans. The purpose of these tariffs is to destabilize the world and to upset the global rule-based balance. But is this what the Americans want? Is this what the rest of the world wants? We've seen how the Canadians have said no to this division. People want to defend the rules in international trade and international relations. That's an important signal which reminds us that there is another path, and that is the path we should follow. The European Union should continue to build its relationships with countries on the same wavelength. No one is going to win a trade war. We end up paying more for less. We therefore have to fight the Trump administration's measures.
Donald Trump has changed the US into a world where nobody knows what is going to happen. But in a world of such instability and uncertainty, one thing is sure, the world has changed and transatlantic relations will never be the same. As such, we have to react united, but with a strategic vision. We shouldn't forget that we are a trade power. We have to act as such. Today, diversification of markets isn't an option. It's something that's urgent and has to happen quickly. An example, spending 5 months since the Mercosur was signed, which is still being looked at legally and is caught up in the member states' considerations. If we delay, well, we have to ensure that our companies become more effective because the world we're living in, the markets we're working with, are ones where we need to act or Europe will lose.
Mr. Oliveira, do you accept it?
Okay.
From the left. Mr. Oliveira, you have 30 seconds.
Thank you, President. Madam Pereira, you said we need to diversify markets and extend them. Unfortunately, this is something that is difficult for the EU to do, considering that how it's acted in the past. Look at Portugal and what's happened there. Do you not feel that the most important thing actually is to diversify our internal market, raising wages, raising pensions, so that actually we are less exposed to the consequences of decisions being taken, for example, by the US? Do you not think that's the path we should take, particularly in Portugal? Thank you.
Muito obrigada.
Thank you very much for the question. The internal market, I presume you mean the EU market. I agree, totally. We should be removing the barriers that exist, all the obstacles that still exist to trade within the EU. And as such, we need to see whether we can do that and respond robustly to the expectations of our consumers and companies. not just Portuguese companies, European companies, so they can compete internationally. And as such, I feel, yes, there are shortcomings that have been identified, not just in the Draghi report, but in others too. We do have some work to do at home. So our strategy is diversifying our markets for international trade and eliminating any barriers that exist to the internal market in Europe.
Señor Moreno.
Thank you. Mr. Moreno.
Thank you, President, Commissioner, Minister. The new US administration has pushed us into a worrying and dangerous trade war, something which we can only lose. And this will almost lead to inflation and unemployment. We are seeing a clear display of unilateralism, which is going to lead to poverty. Commissioner, over the next 90 days, we have to negotiate with equal partners. We have to remember that we are the world's largest single market and trading bloc. At the same time, we have to prepare proportional countermeasures and support plans for those sectors which might be affected by the tariffs, as the Pedro Sanchez government has done in Spain with more than 40 billion euros. I do hope that the EPP will support our economic sovereignty, our workers, our businesses, and vote in support of the plan this week. Moreover, we also have to step our relations with partners such as China, Japan, Canada, Mercosur, and Mexico, to name just a few, using our soft power to transform ourselves into a bulwark of an international rules-based order.
Colleagues, I understand that this is a very important debate, but I already have 15 demands for catch the eye. So I'm going to close from now on the blue cards and as well the option of catch the eye. The list is closed. Madam Stiger.
Ja, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, es ist
Ladies and gentlemen, it's absolutely astonishing the way Europe is heading for the wall. Europe's economy has been going downhill for a long time, and it's not America's fault, it's Europe's own fault. You have been strangling businesses in the Green Deal or the Green Disaster, energy policy, supply chain policy, emissions trading certificates, all this bureaucracy and over-regulation. This is the biggest deindustrialization of Europe ever, and the European Commission strategy is, well, nothing. You've imposed tariffs on China. Why are you complaining about America's tariffs on Europe? The hypocrisy is extraordinary. Austria has the biggest recession of all EU countries, and it's your fault. We are regulating while the US and China are developing.
Stimați colegi, îmi revine bucuria să vă...
Colleagues, I'm glad that the first round of the Romanian elections was won by a convinced pro-American from my own party, George Simion. I really don't understand this hysteria about tariffs. What the Republican administration in Washington is doing is to wake up to the reality, whereas Europe is asleep at the wheel. We have taxes in Europe which are far too high. European companies have lost competitiveness, are not able to innovate. We need to restart the European industry. We need to start making things and reduce our dependency on imports. The European Commission's plans are pathetic. They don't constitute a strategy. Thank you.
Mr. Axinia, Madame Bertin.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, Monsieur le Ministre.
President, Minister, Commissioner, There's almost no country that's been spared, no sector that's been spared. Ideology is stalking the corridors of the Trump White House, brutal protectionism, without rules, without limits. Some here actually have problems in hiding their satisfaction. The reality project that's been applied with zeal by the US administration. Well, what should we be doing? Should we be raising our barriers and escalating? The European Union, strong and united, has chosen another path to come up with a targeted and proportionate response. And at the moment, this has been paused so as to show we're not opposed to dialogue. Commissioner, as long as you are clearly and firmly defending international prosperity and European interests, I will support you. And while you are also prepared to use all of the tools that we have built together, this is an opportunity to deepen our industrial policy in Europe with massive investment, but also to reinforce our partnerships, to diversify our alliances so that we can build a stable, fair, sustainable trade order. Thank you.
Mr. Zdrojewski.
Panie Przewodniczący, Panie Komisarzu.
Mr. President, Commissioner, Minister, we all know very well that decisions on taxes and tariffs should not be taken from one day to the next. Products have complex supply chains. Products don't come into being overnight. Production needs stability. Businesses need to estimate their costs on the basis of some kind of stability. Transport also requires time, the transport of products. What is important is for decisions of this kind in future to be taken with some lead time. We don't want to demolish the world economy. I want to thank the Polish presidency. I'm very proud of the work of the Polish presidency, the Polish government. I want to congratulate Minister Schwabka. He's always been here. I look forward to seeing you next month, and then we'll have the Danish presidency.
You have the floor.
Merci. Thank you. Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen. The President of the United States is a bully. He sees the world as his school playground. But when you're faced with a bully, there's no point in looking away. There's no point in just trying to dodge his blows. We have to show that Europe is strong. Rather than a traditional approach of saying, if you place tax on my will, we'll tax your whiskey, a very expensive approach which won't dissuade Trump, let's adopt a targeted approach at the heart of his empire, digital services, at the heart of the so-called Trumpist oligarchy. Let's finally use the strength of our market. Let's implement the digital law so as to face down Amazon and the other digital giants. The historical moment we're experiencing is the emergence of a European sovereign power when it comes to industry and business. This birth is also an act of divorce. The choices we make now will be a defining characteristic of the nature of Europe for the next decades. The status quo has become impossible. This means we have to move on.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
President, a month ago, the US imposed a 25% tariff on imports of EU cars, which was a blow to our industry, which was already exposed to Asian competitiveness. No surprise, though, that was announced. This is actually the consequence of the lack of European protectionism and opening our markets to the entire world. The European Commission has actually destroyed our industries. It's sacrificed them. It's imposed destructive regulations and expose the automotive industry to competition from the rest of the world. The US is protecting its industry. Brussels is subsidizing NGOs which are militant and responsible for anti-car propaganda. The Commission has suggested annual MOTs for cars more than 10 years old, applying across Europe. This is unfair and unjustifiable in technical terms. It's just going to tax and dissuade our citizens from using their cars. This harassment is unacceptable for millions of families who depend on their cars and their daily lives. The results are clear. The industry is on its knees. Citizens horrified, Europe incapable of defending its interests. It's time to give up on the Green Deal and to restore European preference and national sovereignty and to demand reciprocity and to reshore strategic industries. It's time to move away from international trade and to ensure that in the European Union we protect ourselves first in trade. Thank you.
Madame Maréchal.
Thank you, Madam Maréchal.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. There are people here who seem surprised at the fact that the United States are a fierce economic competitor. Think of BNP Paribas' fine from the Biden administration. Look at what happened to Snowden. Suddenly, there are people who realize the benefits of sovereignty and protectionism. Thank you, Donald Trump, for that. Some people are in favor of increasing our trade deficit with China. That's not the answer. What we need is a new economic model. If energy is costing us 4 or 5 times as much as in the US or China, we don't have a strategy. The priority in Europe needs to be to bring down energy costs, and that means to drop the Green Deal, to go for nuclear, to start drilling, and to invest in geothermal energy.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you, President, Commissioner. The European Union and the US, 30% of world trade. And so the tariffs have a direct impact on our company and particularly on consumers affected by this, as we've heard, by this 12% increase. The European Union should, of course, negotiate because the US has always been our ally. They're not just a trade partner. That means we need a compromise to ensure that we have security and strategic cooperation with the US, which is absolutely vital. Of course, for Portugal in the Azores, this is particularly important. Of course, we need to diversity our trade and look to Mercosur, for example, or India. And the EU needs to open up more. And we also need to ensure that we encourage industry better in the European Union. We need to look at the balance between trading goods and trading services as well, and maybe think about taxing services more to do away with the bias. We need to defend our interests, our strategic autonomy. That's the best way of guaranteeing that we actually can negotiate on a level playing field in the future. Thank you very much, Mr. Assis.
Senhor Presidente, Senhor Comissário.
President, Commissioner, the new US leadership is quite clear. It wants to destroy the Bretton Woods world order and adopt a transactional approach to trading where might is right. We need to make it clear that protectionist trade is not the solution, and the tariffs imposed by the US will actually damage the world economy, particularly the poorer countries. Europe, as such, needs to stand up as the region that has free trade, and it needs to extend its ties with other countries. Now, the US has been a very interesting ally. But the EU stands for values like democracy, rule of law, human rights, as well as being an important trading power. As such, there's another point that we mustn't lose sight of, because US and Trump's administration is something that will be around for a while, and as such the EU needs to react firmly but smartly and calmly when faced with the erratic policies of Trump that actually is damaging not just the EU but first and foremost US citizens too. Thank you, Mr. Von der.
Thank you, Chair. The dynamism, openness, and highly skilled workforce of the US economy are some of America's greatest strengths. But President Trump's tariff-driven protectionism risks undermining these very foundations. After the World War II, free trade helped rebuild Europe, lifting millions into prosperity and ensuring long-term peace and stability. That legacy must be defended. The European Union must champion free trade as a source of growth and resilience. We cannot afford to fall into the trap of rising protectionist sentiment. I'm encouraged that the European Commission remains committed to the trade agreements. The path ahead is clear. We need more pragmatism, less green regulation and taxation, and to promote openness as much as we can.
Thank you, Mr. Vondra. Mr. Altola, you have the floor.
Honourable members, the recent tariffs imposed by the United States strike at the heart of fair and open transatlantic trade. These measures are already hurting European industries, disrupting supply chains and shaking investor and consumer confidence. The European Union has responded responsibly, suspending countermeasures for 90 days to allow for negotiations. But let me be clear, we shall not allow unfair treatment of our businesses or our citizens. If talks fail, we are ready to act firmly and strategically. We have to communicate our resolve clearly. Honey talking does not ultimately work with President Trump. This is not just about economics, it's about standing up for European interests and for our collective defense. Europe is open to dialogue, but not open to intimidation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear colleague. Madame Insig.
To the President of USA, Trump, you are a loser. Because there are no winners in this trade war. It drives up prices, destroys jobs, stifles growth, and hits the most vulnerable the hardest. It affects everyday people the hardest. Trump's heavy tariffs are disturbing supply chains, and in a few weeks, shelves in the US could be empty. And it polarizes a world that already is facing many challenges with, among other things, Russia's unlawful attack on Ukraine. Trade barriers should be dismantled, not built. As the United States retreats from the global stage, turning its back on the very order it helped build after the Second World War, Europe must step up. We need an open world beyond Trump's ideology and the ideology of his extreme right-wing puppets in the EU. We need politics for the many. We need politics for the people. We must strengthen our relationship with other like-minded, Ukraine, Australia, Canada, Japan, India, Brazil, Mexico, and many, many others. Through unity, we will ensure that also today's craziness will soon pass, and openness, cooperation, and freedom will prevail.
Thank you very much, Madame Insir. Mr. Torselli.
Commissioner, I think that this discussion on trade relations between the EU and US should be examined from two viewpoints. First of all, for those, and I hope we all agree, believe that the European Union should send out a clear message to our partners on the other side of the Atlantic. The second viewpoint is that we can't just enter into a power struggle. This is why we need to re-examine our productive sectors and chains. Some people in the House this morning have talked about sanctions. Can you imagine, Commissioner, what it would mean to implement sanctions? On the contrary, Europe should be thinking about diversifying its markets, its productive sectors, about trade with new partners. Commissioner, businesses out on the ground in Europe say that they're not so much worried about US tariffs. What they're really worried about the crazy decisions taken in this House during the last Parliament, which have imposed absurd costs and impossible standards on our businesses. The time has come for us to remove the tariffs which Europe has placed on its own businesses. And we lay great hope and trust in you, Commissioner.
Mr. President, Commissioner, colleagues, EU-US trade relations have for years been part and parcel of our strength. Last year, this trade totaled an impressive €865 billion. We also have in common shared values, democracy, rule of law, and the market economy. Imposing trade tariffs threatens to disrupt our cooperation. There's still a great deal of confusion around, yet this is not the time for us to be offended or become emotional. Europe should remain united and resolute. As representative of Estonia, a small country with an open economy, I say clearly, we need rules-based trade, not arbitrary tariff wars. We should also not allow our businesses and our workers to suffer under unjust pressure. I support the European Commission's efforts to find the best possible solution through negotiation. At the same time, we need to strengthen our internal market, reduce strategic dependencies, and build new international partnerships. Thank you.
Mr. Christa. You have the floor.
Stimați colegi, domnule comisar.
Colleagues, Commissioner, there's a dangerous road ahead, potentially, with our American friends. We have a structural asymmetry in terms of principles, values, and interests. We're no longer aligned, and the prospects are not good. These tariffs are an expression of a deep social crisis in the United States, a social crisis as a result of the unequal distribution of wealth in the United States, the greatest inequality of wealth distribution since the French Revolution. What is being protected in America is not the interests of the workers, but the interests of investors. That is what needs to change.
Thank you, dear Madam Wells.
The audiovisual industry is worth over $1 billion to Ireland's economy. From actor Rob Lowe to Variety magazine, the world recognises our island as a global production powerhouse. Trump's latest threat to slap 1,000% or 100% tariff on foreign movies could wipe out our film industry in an instant. Over 16,000 jobs, many in rural Ireland, hang in the balance. A far cry from Hollywood's drama, the livelihoods of many of my constituents are in doubt as we sit here and debate this morning. Unsurprisingly, this latest policy seems unworkable, given the international and entwined web of investors, labour and revenue. How can one even define a foreign film in this day and age? As time has taught us, there is always scope for a rollback from the Trump administration. However, while we may hope for such courage, we cannot be complacent or naive. I'm calling on the Commission and our Member States to act with urgency and seek the answers from the US on the policy over the coming days and weeks.
Thank you very much, dear colleague. Mr. Picula, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President.
As the global order is under serious pressure, relations with our key ally are becoming one of the most important challenges we must address. It's clear that President Trump is using tariffs as a tool for blackmail. We must be prepared to respond to them equally. If he backs off, we can de-escalate respecting our trade and digital services laws. It's not just about trade in goods. When we add the exchange of services to the overall trade relationship, we almost reach an equilibrium. While politics on the other side of the Atlantic is currently arbitrary and transactional, the European Union must be a factor of global stability and conducts politics clearly and based on facts. Moreover, this situation is an opportunity for the EU to take political responsibility, attract experts who share our values, and assume the global role because it has the democratic strength and economic capacity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. El señor Jiménez Larraz.
Thank you, President. EU's strength lies in its trade. We're a major player, 450 million people with their purchasing power. And so we can speak as an equal to anyone, including the US. This trade war benefits nobody, even the person starting it. We need to count on our unity. We mustn't fall into the trap of acting alone. Our commercial rivals want to divide us, and there's a reason for that. Let's negotiate right until the end, because that would benefit us and our trade allies. But when faced with the trade war, we do have tools, we do have answers, so let's prepare. If the US doesn't fall back, let's look for new markets. Mercosur, Mexico, let's have more, better agreements. Free trade is a underpinning principle of the EU, and we need to promote that rather than promoting national solutions. We need more Europe, not less. Thank you, Mr. Jimenez. Mr. Riordan, you have the floor.
80,000 Irish jobs at risk. Last week, as we marked May Day, Trump's reckless tariffs cast a shadow over workers and businesses across Europe. The full impact is unclear, but what is clear is that unless we act, it's workers who will pay the price. We saw this in 2008 when families bore the brunt of the crash, and we can't let that happen again. We must protect those who keep our economies running, workers and small businesses. Real strength doesn't come from governments reneging on sick pay and living wage commitments, as the Irish government has done, but from decent jobs, affordable housing and public investment. These tariffs are really about a perverse perception of power, and Europe must respond with unity and resolve. If Trump wants a trade war, we won't have started it, but we won't back down. This is our moment to prove that Europe is more than a market. Indeed, it is a movement, and we are a union of values, one that stands up for its people.
Thank you very much, dear colleague, Mr. Pavlikevic.
President, Commissioner, colleagues, the United States is again turning to protectionism, an approach history has shown to hurt, not to help citizens. Tariffs may look like a shield, but act like a sword, rising prices and limiting choices. Europe must not respond with isolation. Our strength is openness, competitiveness, and fair trade partnership. Instead of building walls, let's deepen ties with democratic allies from Canada and Australia to Japan, and at the same time maintain relations with the United States as much as economic profitability allows. Let's not allow others' short-term thinking to define our future. Free trade is not naive. It's in Europe's best interest. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Camberry.
Mr. President, Commissioner, the EU and the US economic relationship is built on decades of cooperation and mutual success. However, when our industries, farmers and SMEs face unfair trade measures, Europe must respond. We are strongest when united. Acting together, we send a clear signal that we will not be divided or weakened by economic pressure. Our response must be twofold. We must look towards our own internal market. Europe must prioritise becoming more competitive, resilient and decisive. That means investing in innovation, cutting red tape and creating a genuine market for capital. And we must also look to new horizons by securing new but fair trade agreements that open doors for our consumers and businesses. We have already proven that a united voice, a united Europe, is the only way forward.
Thank you, Madam. Señor De Meo.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Commissioner. The recent tensions in the field of trade with the US remind us just how fragile the European economy can be and how important it is for us to speak out with a single and strong European voice. Faced with the unilateral measures which are damaging in great swathes of our economy, the EU's response cannot be to either hesitate or to split. We have to define a clear and fully supported strategy. We have to remove internal barriers which hold back the internal market. We have to step up investment in our competitivity and technology development. Our real objective, however, should be more ambitious. We should build a structured economic relationship with the US and Canada, a zero-tariff zone with shared common rules which will benefit consumers and businesses. We can't limit ourselves to following the choices made by others. The EU must ensure it be a leader when it comes to world trade policy. We have to speak with a single voice, strengthen our own economic sovereignty and make this more sustainable. Europe should no longer simply follow, we must lead.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Commissioner. Colleagues. 90 days does give us an opportunity, and I think that the EU is reacting correctly, firmly. Clearly, trade words don't benefit anyone, but the US doesn't know that, although it's learning it. In 2008, the situation was different. Now, tariff policy should be providing us with stability rather than giving China opportunities. And of course, we shouldn't either bow to Trump. The EU is fundamental. And tariffs are obviously an area where we need to work because we can't have tariffs on bourbon or on wine. We need to ensure that those are withdrawn. As Letta and Draghi both said, we actually should be working on simplification in a lot of sectors, including the agri-food sector. We need to guarantee food sovereignty so as to ensure more resilience. And yes, of course, we need to have a trade policy, but we need to ensure there's no unfair competition. Thank you, Ms. Crisper. Mr. Niedermayer.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, US tariff policy is just wrong, not only for all the world, but also for US firms and businesses. This will be the people and firms of US who will pay most of 100 billions of tariffs if they are actually collected. But we are not here to set the US policy. We are rightly debating our response. And here I am very glad that I can endorse the plan of the Commission, and I would just encourage the Commission to keep trying up to the last minute and find the best solution. I guess the first part of the plan is obviously effort to minimize or avoid the tariffs and to keep or even extend the fair and free trade with the US. If you ask me if it's likely, I don't know. So that's why we should have the plan B that is proportionate. Secondly, we should extend where possible the trade with the third country and also coordinate on possible responses. But the most important and most effective way is to deepen and complete the single market. There is no excuse for not doing that because this will give the prosperity and stability of the European economy. Thank you.
Thank you, dear colleague. Madame Terlac.
Since
Trump's taken power, the terms tariffs and trade barriers had never been so popular before. His protectionism and unpredictable policy have upended the world economy. The US, under Trump's leadership, is no longer the stable partner which Europe was used to. Let's be honest. Trump is unpredictable, and that's not going to change. His tariff policy has no beneficial effects. It's not just a one-off, however. It's now become a standard position. He will remain an unstable partner. We need stability and predictability. The task we as politicians have is to ensure that we achieve this stability. Otherwise, we and our businesses won't be able to invest, despite the fact that investment is essential for us to remain competitive and to invest in the climate. Europe and the Netherlands must review their strategy. We should look to new markets, Ukraine, Africa, India, South America, a whole series of opportunities for new trade agreements. This is not a luxury, it's a necessity. If we want to maintain access to critical raw materials, if we want to maintain our prosperity, we have to think in a wider context. The future of economy can't depend on one unreliable president, but on trustworthy, reliable alliances around the world.
Question, Madame Lexman.
Ďakujem za slovo.
Thank you. Colleagues, Commissioner, this week we commemorate the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. Europe as we know it was built on a strong transatlantic alliance built on shared values. They helped us defend ourselves against totalitarian regimes. The present geopolitical context requires bold strategic thinking at the highest political level to maintain sustainable cooperation. Right from the start, I insist that instead of criticizing, we should negotiate constructively with the United States and look for what we have in common. The last thing we should do is to cozy up to undemocratic regimes. We should not allow totalitarian regimes to take advantage of our disunity. Flirting with the Chinese Communist Party will ultimately undermine our economy and our security, as well as tarnishing the legacy of all those who defended human dignity and democracy, the very foundation of the European Union. Thank you.
Colleague, as I've said before, I have 15 requests for Catch the Eye. So I'm not going to attend all of them, to give all of them. And for those groups with more than 2 demands, 2 requests, I'm going to give only 2. First place, Mr. Millan Mon, seat 584.
Economic relations between the EU and the US are the most important in the world. Not just trade in goods, but in services and investment. The figures show the links between the economies that benefit both of them. A tariff war is not good for consumers, workers, companies, or the economy in general. It only benefits inflation. As buoyant an economy as the US used to have, actually registered 0.3% fall over the last quarter, and it could enter into recession this quarter. We need to continue negotiations with Washington. The EU should be putting forward a positive and ambitious agenda for the US. Trade in energy, technology, and also covering challenges like trade with China. And why not public procurement? We tried to conclude TTIP 10 years ago, unsuccessfully. What a shame. So I think we need to continue to diversify our economic and trade relations through agreements such as Mercosur and with Mexico and Asian countries like India. And we shouldn't forget, Commissioner, that we need to deepen the internal market as requested in the letter report last year. Thank you, Mr. Myanmar. Mr. Rapini.
Seat 542. Yeah, you have the floor.
Domnule comisar.
Commissioner, Mr. President, colleagues. What we're discussing today is extremely important from the point of view of the future of the European Union. Commissioner, you need a strong negotiating position. This is important for the negotiating team. If we don't have a strong single market, there's no point going into this negotiation. We need to develop Europe's industry. We need people buying European products. This is it's for Trump to decide. But what are we bringing to the negotiating table? We need solid arguments. We need to show that the internal market is important, it's attractive to the United States, and we need to have a win-win situation. We need huge volumes of investments, but I don't see an agenda. What sort of arguments are you going to take to this negotiation? I don't really understand.
Mr. Tinkinen.
Mr. President, our greatest adversary is not the United States, but a dictatorship far more dangerous to Europe's trade future, China. It is quite astonishing that some in Europe have started to seek closer cooperation with the Chinese dictatorship as a response for the US. You are willing to turn a blind eye to what China presents just to get to show your middle fingers to the other side of the Atlantic. Are you really that childish? You are all acting like a bunch of high school divas. But I say we take a different approach. I say we grow up and work towards finding a meaningful agreement with the United States, one that benefits both parties. And we can start by cutting back on our dependence on China. Let's do that for our own sake as well, before it's too late. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Boutmans.
Thank you, President. Minister, Commissioner. In the debate today, there's clearly a line which is not technical. We don't want escalation. There's a clear commitment against that here. At the same time, we don't want to bow down, Commissioner. I think we should face up to the bully. Let's be clear with him. And I felt that in the debate today. So I think we have to say, look, this is our best offer. 0 tariffs on both sides. 0 tariffs here, 0 tariffs there. Say to Mr. Trump, when you're ready to negotiate, we are too. In the meantime, we'll be concluding agreements with Canada, China, Japan, agreements which could help all of us, which won't make us worse off. So, colleagues, I think that should be our position. Europe is willing to take a big step, but we're not fools. We need to protect our citizens and our businesses. Thank you.
El señor Asens en SIT 247.
La guerra comercial de Trump.
Trump's trade war is a symptom of a structural crisis of the liberalized trade from the 80s on, and each crisis is an opportunity not to go back to prior positions or to help Trump with his self-destructive war, but to think about fairer policies. That means a great many things, but amongst other things, strengthening the democratic sovereignty of our economy and ensuring that imports respect the labour environmental standards that we do. It also means ensuring that we have a digital area of our own in Europe. It means promoting more balanced multilateralism. And it also means ensuring and encouraging public oversight of strategic sectors. Trump is putting up walls. We need to promote rights. We shouldn't, in fact, come up with more neoliberalism on our side. No, another world, another form of trade is both necessary and urgent. Thank you.
Tenga SIT 124.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner Šefčovič. I read your remarks in the press, and I sometimes wonder, is there a Eurovision contest for being Washington's best lapdog? Because honestly, Trump threatens us, and your reaction is, well, we might import more shale gas, Yes, that's going to cost us very, very dearly. Our workers will pay more. It's going to pollute our planet, but we'll do it. Please be nice to us. The agricultural produce, I think you spoke about more beans on the EU market. Why do we want to reward him? Or China? You say, yes, let's be tougher on China. This will mean increased prices for European consumers and less access potentially to technology for our economy. Now, I think if you really want to react to what Trump is doing and what you would do if you'd be attacked by, I don't know, China with a trade war, Russia or whatever, would be to invest in our own infrastructure. Why don't we take, I don't know, public energy companies? You know, they can guarantee cheap, affordable energy to industries and to workers. Or diversify our relations also with China and with all these other countries that have been mentioned. That is the strategy and that is what we need. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Papadakis, seat 811.
Η επιβολή δασμών στο διεθνές καπιταλισμό
is part of competition for who's going to be first in the capitalist system. And the US and the Russia have their own role. It's commercial wars, it's rare earths, it's the transport corridors for trade and for energy, and that causes wars. And we have huge capital being amassed to produce a new financial crisis for the capitalist system. Europe's people have no reason to support these wars of Europe or of its competitors, and there will be a heavy bill to pay because of these tariffs, because of these sanctions, and this will only be to the detriment of the people. And what the people should do was ask for their rights to be respected, because for the people to win, capital has to lose.
Janovici Sosoaka, seat 859.
Mulțumesc.
Thank you.
Kiitoksia.
I don't know how you imagine negotiating with someone you offended immediately after he was elected. I don't know why nobody is inviting you, but I was invited by the Republicans and by the American administration in Mar-a-Lago and in Washington. And I talked to them directly. We can talk to them, but we're talking here about economy. When you hire people, when you put people on your list, do you ask them? You ask them about their sexual options instead of asking them about their economic options and about their background. With all due respect, you are destroying Europe, and Trump is defending his citizens and his country. You have destroyed Europe. You're talking about dictatorship in the United States, but you, the socialists, have you been there? I don't think there is a dictatorship in North Korea as we have in Europe, and you destroyed democracy in Romania because you interfered in our elections. We have illegal, unconstitutional elections, and you banned candidates like myself. This is what you should be doing. You should do Europe democratic.
Mr. Oliveira, seat 125.
Obrigado, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Commissioner Šefčovič, the response to Trump's tariffs needs to be set in three different areas. Firstly, strengthening the single market with increasing people's purchasing power and increasing wages and salaries. We need to use our single market to make us less dependent, less vulnerable, and less exposed to decisions from others around the world. Secondly, we need to develop our productive capacity, specifically with a reindustrialization policy, and we need to incorporate science and technology in production within our own businesses so that in doing so we will be less vulnerable and less dependent on decisions taken elsewhere in the world. Obviously there's tariffs on goods but also on raw materials. Thirdly, we need to have a trade policy which is diversified. We need trade agreements which don't undermine small countries just to benefit large countries. We need to find the correct manner to develop economically on basis of international cooperation. This is the best way to move forward, not a question of being Trump's lapdog.
Señora Miranda, seat 186.
Muito obrigada, señor presidente. A pausa do medo,
Blackmail and Mr. Trump's delirium cannot be a way of directing European trade policy. We cannot cede to the authoritarian blackmail from Mr. Trump. We need to assess the impact of tariffs announced by Trump. These are a direct threat on the sovereignty of our people. They're a threat for our economies and for jobs. It's in my country, Galicia, the interventionist policy of Mr. Trump undermines the metal sector as well as the automotive sector and further sectors. Commissioner, we need investment in strategic sectors. We also need strategic autonomy. Commissioner, we also need to have the productive capacity. We need to protect our industry to stop social dumping and economic dumping. Thank you very much.
Señora Miranda, señor López Aguilar. Seat 379.
Comisario Šefčovič, es evidente.
Well, Commissioner Šefčovič, the fact that Trump is back in the White House has really been a kick to the chessboard, the global chessboard. So I don't think we need to feel weak. We need to be united. A world based on rules, multilateralism in international trade. There's one message which has not reached everyone. We need to tell Trump that the EU was not meant to screw the US. The European Union was not created to bother and annoy the United States. The idea of the European Union is endogenous. It has its own values, and we need to be autonomous, a strategic autonomy, and also autonomy towards those unilateral measures. We can only introduce fair and proportional countermeasures, but affirming the autonomy of the European Union. Thank you.
Madame Annunziata, seat 382.
Grazie, Commissario. Parlerò in Italiano. I'll speak Italian. Thank you, Commissioner. You will apologize. I will apologize. I'm not going to talk so much about data. I'm going to talk about Gaza, because it's basically the same idea. The Trump solution of taking private interests before public interests. President Trump will be in Jerusalem for his very first international visit, and Netanyahu and his government has felt that this situation is a gift for him. Yesterday, the government plans to invade Gaza to kick the Palestinians out, and then to leave it up to private international organizations, NGOs, who will have to take care of the Palestinians. This is another page in our democracies. We had a policy of mediation. So international humanitarian organizations of the states are replaced by private organizations. So I'm looking at this year that I've been here, and I have not seen anything. We don't seem to be able to make any difference in Palestinian. But don't worry, because the ghosts will be hovering over us. Thank you.
Ducatis, seat 309.
Thank you. Dear Commissioner, dear Maros, I welcome your today's statement. The predictable unpredictability of Trump's policies is a challenge. And Trump's brutal tariff war and nationalist protectionism are a real threat. We must stay united and determined in promoting and defending rule-based global trade and multilateralism. And of course, we need to intensify trade with other markets like Mercosur, modernize and capitalize on our benefits of existing free trade agreements with Canada, Mexico. But we must urgently complete our single market, urgently provide EU-wide targeted support for impacted European industries and our affected regions. State aid to our industries and small and medium medium enterprises is necessary. We must buy European goods and services and promote made-in-Europe products. Our strategic industrial and autonomy demands it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our last speaker, Mr. Jonski. Seat 494.
Bardzo dziękuję.
Thank you very much. Commissioner, the tariffs imposed by the US on EU exports represent €7 billion to 8.1 billion in this year, so it's 70 billion more. 70% of EU products exported to the States will now have tariffs imposed on them. Of course, the car sector is the heaviest hit. EU export is worth 66 billion, and 16 billion in tariffs will be imposed on that. It affects my country because we create 800,000 cars in my country. It might impact the global economy to the level of 7%, particularly France, Germany. Now, more than the French and German economies are worth taken together. Now, we don't want a tariff war. We want partnership. And that's why free trade bilaterally is a sensible proposal. I think it's a useful bilateral proposal. Thank you.
And now to close the debate on behalf of the Commission, Commissioner Šefčovič, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, Honourable Minister, Honourable Members of the European Parliament. First and foremost, Mr. President, I would like to thank you for organising the work of this House in a way that we can have regular debates on the issue of strategic importance. Yesterday, I think we had an excellent debate on the future relationship with the United Kingdom. Today, we are discussing how we should advance our negotiations and relationship with the United States of America. And I see that Chairman Lange is here. I also would like to appreciate the almost permanent interaction with the INTA committee and with all relevant committees, because clearly this is such an important issue that we have to act united, we have to work together, and we have to be properly informed, and we always seek, of course, the input and guidance from the European Parliament in these very important issues. Today's debate was one of the most profound, also one of the longest, which just reflects the importance of the topic we are discussing. And I really would like to thank all of you, because I think overall impression I've got is that we understand each other very much on how to pursue what I would describe a four-pillar policy. First one, Mr. Warborn mentioned it, but a lot of other colleagues, Mr. Procaccini, Mr. Kals, Madame Vedren, that we should use every opportunity to engage with our American partners, to negotiate and to look for fair, and I would underline, balanced solution. As you can imagine, it's not easy, but I can also reassure you that we will do our utmost to arrive at that destination, because we, as the biggest trading partner of the United States of America, with millions of jobs to be affected by these measures on both sides of the Atlantic, feel responsibility for making sure that we would find best possible solution for both of us. Many of you proposed the ideas which, frankly, we already tested, we proposed, and we are waiting for the reaction from our American partners. For example, zero tariffs for cars, but also for industrial goods, looking what we can do in different certification processes just to make sure that we would make it easier for our businesses and not more complicated for them to actually profit from this biggest, most massive trade relationship on this planet. I was personally discussing with Secretary of Commerce, Mr. Latnik, and Mr. Jamieson Greer, who is leading the USTR offices on multiple occasions, and we spent together dozens and dozens of hours on where we would be much stronger if we would act together. Let's tackle the dependencies if it comes to critical raw materials, if it comes to key supply materials for our medicines. Let's tackle together overcapacity in the steel sector, because I believe that these are the areas where we can clearly achieve much more together if we work as allies, as partners. So let's see what would be the reaction from our American partners. At the same time, I would like to reassure everyone, especially Mr. López Aguilar, that we do not feel weak. We do not feel under undue pressure to accept the deal, which would not be fair for us. We are absolutely clear that we are the biggest trading bloc on this planet, with very strong economy and with very biggest actually the network of our free trade agreements. And we know that this negotiation might not in the end succeed despite of all our sincere efforts. So therefore, we of course are preparing for the possible and might be needed rebalancing. As you've been informed about our first set of measures, which we suspended because we wanted to create space for negotiations, so we will be continuing our preparation for the further rebalancing if needed. And I would like to reassure all of you that all options are clearly on the table. Third very important element raised by many of you is that we have to highlight that these tariffs are simply unjust, unfair, and in total breach of international commercial law. And therefore, we are also considering another options and to challenge these measures in the WTO. So we are fully aware how important this is, and I think that all trading world is looking at making sure that we will come back to the rules-based international trade, to respect of the rules for all of us, because this is how the international trade should function in the future. And the last point, and thank you very much who mentioned it so clearly, Madam van Brandt, Madam Hahn, Madam Niebler, and I appreciate also the support from Mr. Oliveira, who was highlighting the importance of diversifying our trade relations. We have to make sure that we would get the most out of 87% of the global trade. And I can tell you that our phones are not stopping ringing all the time, because everyone wants to accelerate free trade agreements, negotiations with us. Everyone wants to open it if they are not open, and we are clearly opening more avenues, and I'm sure that after this mandate, the European Commission will have much larger free trade networks than it has right now, and it will be clearly to the benefits of our workers, of our businesses, of our SMEs, because we are going to open for the new market access, and we are going to promote the European fair, sustainable way of trading. And if you allow me, on the last point, Mr. President, I totally agree with you that we need not only to look abroad, but also to look what we can do better inside of our European Union. And I think that this particular situation with the tariff, highlighting that also on our internal market, we still have too many barriers, which are limiting the potential of our single market, which are making it difficult for our businesses, especially for our SMEs, to strive even more on a single market. And therefore, Executive Vice President Mr. Séjourné was clearly tasked by our President Ursula von der Leyen to focus on this like the laser beam, to remove the tariffs, to increase the potential of the single market, because that's a very strong response. This is where we could be much more forceful than in the past, and I believe that combination of all these measures would make sure that Europe will not remain only the biggest trader on this planet, but also strongest economy we have, and in a close cooperation with the partners who share the same ideals, the same principles if it comes to international trading. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Mr. Šefčovič. On behalf of the Council, Minister Slapka.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, Mr. Commissioner, honourable members. Thank you very much for this debate. Despite current difficulties, the US is our strategic partner and ally, and our trade and investment relationship remains a key importance. The sheer unpredictability of the current trade and investment environment is detrimental to both the EU and the US, as well as globally. We therefore remain committed to engaging and finding the fair and mutually balanced negotiated solution. At the same time, we need to focus on ourselves, what we can do more to help our industry to enhance competitiveness and spur economic growth in the EU. The unity has characterized our approach so far, and I believe it will remain our key asset also in the future. Under any scenario, We are determined to promote our common interest and defend our legitimate rights. Together, in a spirit of unity, we shall achieve our goals. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. The debate is closed.